In this video, I cover creating your APA reference list based on APA 7th edition. This is a brief overview. It's not going to go into specific types of entries. Okay, so when you are trying to create the reference list entry for your work, you first need to determine the reference group, then the category, and then the type. And then you can look at APA's example and model your referenced entry after that. This is a little bit different than what you might be used to with MLA, where you memorize the core elements and then repeat the container elements as needed. So this is a little different. APA, there's so many variations on different types of sources that you have to kind of narrow down what type of source or what type of work you're working with, and then look at their template for that. So in APA, we have 5 groups: textual works, dataset, software tests, audiovisual media, online media, and legal references. Then within those groups, we have categories. So under textual works, we have periodicals, books, reference works, edited book chapters, reference work entries, reports and grade literature, dissertations and theses, reviews, and informally published works. So those would be the categories under textual works. Under data sets, your categories are computer software and mobile apps, test scales, and inventories. And under audiovisual media group, your categories are audiovisual works, audio works, and visual works. And under online media, your categories are social media, web pages, and websites. And under legal references group, your categories are cases or court decisions, statutes like laws or acts, constitutions and charters, and treaties and international conventions. Okay, so we have our 5 groups across the top, and then within those we have our categories. And then from there you have to further narrow it down. Once you're in the category, what type are you dealing with? So, for example, under textual works, that would be your group. Then your category would be periodical, and then your type would be journal article, or another type would be a magazine article, or another type would be a newspaper article, or another type would be a blog post. Another example with social media, your group would be online media. Then you would narrow it down to your category of social media, and then within that category, you would have the type of tweets, Facebook posts, or Instagram photos. So to create your reference list entry, first determine the reference group, then the category, and then the type. And then you refer to the APA example reference and follow that example. You have those 5 groups, and within those you have your categories, and then underneath the categories you have the types. APA doesn't really care how you access the work and what format that work is in. So for example, APA doesn't care if you got to work online or in print, and if that work is print or if it's electronic or if it's a DVD. That type of stuff won't impact your reference list entry. All right, speaking of web pages and websites, most of the stuff that we encounter is online. And so a lot of people want to just jump straight to the web page or website category, which is not true for APA. So you only use your web page or website category when the work you're using doesn't fit better in another category. So first ask yourself, what type of work is on this website that I'm looking at? And then choose the reference category from there. So, for example, if you're looking at a report on a government website, ask yourself, what type of work is on this website? It is a report, so then we would look at the report category. So underneath textual works, we have our reports. So this is actually going to be cited as a report, not as a website. All right, another example, we are looking at a web page from a government website. So this would be in the web pages category. This would be underneath the online media. All right, now when we're dealing with online or print works, the reference entries in APA style are going to be largely the same. The differences between the two are going to show up in the source element. So in APA reference list entries, we have 4 elements: author, date, title, and source, which we'll talk about more in a second. And when we're dealing with something that's online versus something in print, those differences are going to show up in the source element. All right, now as you're building your reference list entries, you might want to quote unquote Frankenstein together your templates. Like take a little bit of a template for a web page and mix it with a template for a dictionary entry and mix it with a template for a government report. And you don't want to do that, right? So identify the APA template that works best for the type of work you're trying to cite. Don't mix different templates together. All right, so back to those 4 elements of a reference entry. They were author, date, title, and source. Let's talk about those in more detail. So if you understand these 4 elements, that's going to help you create reference list entries yourself or check and verify the ones that you get from a citation creator or from a database that's automatically creating. So you can check these. Now, sometimes some of this information might be missing, and so it has to be adapted. And if you go to APA's website or their handbook or their guides, they have tips about, okay, what do I do if I don't have an author? What do I do if I don't have this? And so you have to adapt these from time to time. So an author, when we look at that, we're asking ourselves, who's responsible for this work? The second element, date. When was the work published? And if there is no date, a lot of times web pages don't have dates, then you would use n dot space d dot. And then title. What is this work called? And source, where can I retrieve this work? Okay, so first up, the author. This is one of the 4 elements of your reference list entry in APA. Ask yourself, who's responsible for the work? So it's probably going to be an individual. Maybe it's multiple people. It could also be a group, such as an institution, a government agency, or an organization, or it could be a combination of individual people and groups. You can also determine the author element from context. So APA says you can go look at the organization who produced it, the About Us page, the acknowledgments, etc. And whenever you are writing these reference list entries out, they will look somewhat like this. So a single author, you would have their last name, comma, space, first initial, period, space, middle initial, period. If you have 2 authors, you would have the ampersand or the and sign in between. If you have 3 or more authors, you would list them out with commas in between their names and the ampersand before the last one. You can also have groups or organizations, and you would spell their name out. So American Psychological Association and National Institutes of Health. These would be 2 groups responsible for producing some sort of work. But if you don't have an author, then APA says move the title of the work into the slot where you would put the author. All right, our second of the 4 elements is date. So ask yourself, when was this work published? You might just have a year. Sometimes you have a year, a month, and a day. Sometimes you just have a year and a month. Sometimes you have a year and a season, like 2025 fall. Sometimes you'll have a range of dates, and sometimes you'll have no date, so you would have n.d. Note that APA spells out the name of the months. That's different from what you might be used to with MLA that will abbreviate months. Our third element of APA reference list entry is our title. So we ask ourselves, what is this work called? Works that stand alone, like books, reports, films, TV series, podcasts, social media, works on websites, we will italicize those titles, and we will use sentence case capitalization, which means we capitalize the first letter. The rest of the words will be lowercase unless they're proper nouns. You would capitalize the first letter after a colon if you have a title and a subtitle, but most of the words will be lowercase. Works that are part of a greater whole. So for example, articles in a periodical, chapters in a book, episodes of a TV series, or episodes of a podcast. So those are smaller things inside of a larger whole. Do not italicize those titles. Don't put quotation marks around them. You might be used to that from MLA. and use your sentence title capitalization here. So note that the titles here are using sentence case capitalization. That's a new one for a lot of us. All right, and our fourth element of APA reference list entries is our source. This is when we ask ourselves, where can I retrieve this work? Where could somebody go get it? So things that stand alone, you would give the publisher. Unless the publisher is the same as the author, you don't have to put it twice. You do not italicize the name of a publisher, and you do use title case capitalization. All right, what about works that are part of a greater whole? So if your title was a chapter in a book, then the source would be the name of that whole book, that greater whole. So if it's a website name, you would use title case, no italics. If it's a book title, you would use sentence case, and you would italicize it. If it's a periodical title, you would title case and italicize. Also note that when you have a periodical, in the source, you're also going to tell us the volume, the issue, and the pages, or the volume, the issue, and the article number, and the DOI if it's online. So here's an example journal article reference list entry. I'll point out those 4 elements to you. Hopefully you can spot them. So first we have author. And here we can see these names. We have last names and first and middle initials. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people with the ampersand before the last person's name. So this is our author element. After that, we have date. Here we have the year. Note it is in parentheses. Note that in between our elements, we have periods. So in between the author and the date, we have a period. In between the date and the title, we have a period. Now here's the third element, the title of this work. It is Text Message Safety Behavior Reduction for Social Anxiety, semicolon, a randomized controlled trial. So if we look at this, we see that this is an article in a periodical. And so the title of the article is in sentence case. So that means only the first letter is capitalized, as well as the first letter of the subtitle after the semicolon. And any proper nouns would be capitalized if there were, but there aren't any. So the rest of the letters are lowercase. Also note it is not italicized, and it does not have quotation marks around it. Okay, now our last element, element number 4, is source, which is where can I retrieve this work? Notice the period between the title and the source element. Now here's our source element. We have a periodical. So we have the title of the journal, the volume, the issue, the pages, and the DOI. Notice that the title of the journal is italicized and it is title capitalized. So the J, the C, and the P are capitalized. Notice that within this element, we use commas to break up the different parts. So notice that between the elements, we had periods, but within the source element, we have a lot of information, and so we have commas separating that. So first we have the title of the periodical. Then we have a comma. Then we have the volume number in italics, followed by the issue number in parentheses with no space in between. Notice that the volume is italicized, but the issue is not. And then we have a comma, and we have our page range, pages 445 to 454, and a period and the DOI at the end. Make sure your link actually works and someone can click on it. So one of the things you need to know, and take this with you when you leave this video, it's not helpful to memorize the APA entries. So don't memorize the APA entries. You need to memorize where to go to figure out how to make the APA entry. There are too many variations of reference list entries to memorize them. Remember at the beginning when we had 5 groups, each group has several categories, and each category has several types within it. That's way too many variations for you to memorize all the different ways to build those. So that's why APA guidance is figure out what you're trying to create a reference list entry for, then go look at their templates, which are available on their website, and imitate that. Basically copy it based on the information you have. So where can you go to find this information? Well, you could go straight to the source. You could go to the APA Style Manual or their concise guide, which you can get from our library or you could purchase yourself. You could also just go to the APA website. Their website has a ton of free information and downloadable PDFs and templates. You don't have to pay for any of it. The one that I'd like to point you to is called the Scaffolded Reference Elements Worksheet. That's going to break down the 4 elements: author, date, title, source, show you several different examples and how to put that together. And then our librarians have created library guides for the different citation styles, so you can jump to the guide about APA. So it's more helpful for you to memorize where to go to figure out how to do the APA citation. It's not helpful for you to memorize the various variations of APA citations.